2, 1.
This message is transmitted at the request of the United States Office of Civil Defense. At 3:40 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, NORAD detected a long-range nuclear missile launch in North Korea.
You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
The only real effect I can have is to create the impression that things aren't as bad as they are. To give our people time, the opportunity to survive.
Yes, I just never realized I'd gone so far. We've lost so much control.
Totalitarianism doesn't need armies. It only needs to control a couple of things. The media and the ability to dispense privilege to some and withhold it from others. Of course, a weak and divided people helps.
There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interactive, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichsmarks, rands, rubles, pounds, and shekels. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet.
And good evening, everybody. Welcome to our weekly Wednesday night show here on Blog Talk Radio. This is Surrounded by Idiots, and you are listening to the Freedom Talk Radio 2013 network. You can see, actually, the show notes, the script that I am using tonight, if you go over to, open up another tab in your browser, and go to ussamichigan.com and follow the big red link, and you will be able to see my show notes live and in person. If you'd like to call into the show during the show tonight, the number is area code 347-677-0812, 347-677-0812. And after last week's initial debacle of doing our first show, where we had dead air for the first couple of minutes, this week we do not have that problem. And tonight's show is brought to you by the Small Company Moving Guide. When the really, really smart people at Mensa needed to move their offices, they came to the Small Company Moving Guide. Everything you need for a smooth move. That's smallcompanymovingguide.com. And during the week here, this week, we have had a roller coaster of weather here in the Midwest and here in southeastern Michigan. We've had 3 straight days of rain. We had one warm day, and now we are experiencing record low temperatures at night. It's great football kind of weather. Now, I've been thinking over the past week, when we arranged to have our guest tonight on, I have been actually aware of our guest for some time now, and he is one of those people that I have always wanted to talk to for an extended amount of time so that I can gain some knowledge, and the audience can also gain as much knowledge as possible about something that a lot of people think is boring, and that's economics. But let me ask you, what is the most dangerous problem we face as a nation, as the family of human beings? It's not a Russian atomic bomb. It's not the North Koreans, Iran, or the Middle East. It's not a giant meteor, a kill shot from the sun, Planet X, or even an earthquake. With the exception of the sun kill shot and the meteor, all those problems are regional. The most devastating thing that could happen to us as a society worldwide is hyperinflation or collapse of the economy. For a human invention, the economy can lay waste to millions of lives, cause anarchy, stop the government, and even prevent you from sitting on your fat butts watching this week's football game. Now imagine going to work. You're on your way to work, and gas is $4 a gallon, but you're late for work, and you're going to fill up your gas tank tonight. And then when you leave work, gasoline is $22 a gallon, and now you can't afford to get home. You think that's far-fetched? Think again. A stable economy is worth more than gold, more precious than that plasma television or your smartphone, for without it, this country, the United States, can become a backwater of the world ripe for invasion. And the problem that we have right now is that the sow of the government trough has too many piglets suckling at the teats of the government milk, and they will not like being weaned from that manna from the god of the central government. Now, when I started to prepare for this show, the number of articles that I came upon once I started looking around was startling. The information is out there if you look for it, and our guest tonight has a ton of information. Tonight, I'm going to show you what I've found, and our guest is going to educate you on the dangers that we face. And believe it or not, I came across something this morning that was very surprising to me, and I never expected this name to come up with this, but apparently I was tragically wrong. Bono, you remember Bono, the rock star? He said the following just the other day: capitalism takes more people out of poverty than aid does. And I thought that was very interesting, considering our guest tonight. Our guest is Hunter Lewis. He is the author of the upcoming book, Free Prices Now and Crony Capitalism. And in the show description, just below the show stream that you are listening to, there is a link for both of those books so that you can pre-order them or get the Kindle version. If you're at USSA Michigan, the links are right there. Anytime you go to our website, a big pop-up window is going to open with links to get his book. You can also get his book at againstcronycapitalism.org. Hunter will be speaking tonight about abolishing the Federal Reserve and why Keynesian economics is wrong, wrong, wrong. He is the former CEO of Cambridge Associates and has authored 6 books. He has served on boards and committees of 15 not-for-profit organizations, including environmental, teaching, research, cultural organizations, as well as the World Bank. So let me bring up his microphone right now, and we are going to say good evening to Hunter Lewis. Hunter, are you there?
Yes, thanks for having me.
Oh, excellent. This worked the first time around. I'm always happy when that works. Now, Hunter, in 2008, I remember this because I have been an avid watcher of the economy because, well, I rely on it so much, as does everybody else. And I remember in 2008, just after the election of the current regime, there was a lot of discussion about a subject that should send shivers up the spine of anyone with any common sense. One place that I found right off the bat was answers at yahoo.com. What is the relevance of Keynesian economics to today's crisis? And the answer that came in was this: the relevance is that everyone is going to hoard money because no one has any money. If the stimulus packages are sent out again, people will save rather than spend. Do you agree with that?
Well, of course not. That's complete nonsense.
Okay, why?
But more importantly, you know, this whole idea of hoarding is fundamentally wrong. The Keynesians think that what really drives the economy is spending. That, you know, we just need a lot of spending to create jobs, and they don't particularly care what the spending is. Keynes talked about burying things in mines and having private enterprise dig it up. And, you know, that would be just, or building pyramids. That would be just as good as any other spending, as long as we got the spending going. But that's completely wrong. What makes an economy work is intelligent spending, intelligent investing, intelligent spending. It's not just the level of spending that matters. It's intelligence, how you do it, the quality of your investment. That's what makes an economy successful. And the Keynesians and the people running the economy today just completely ignore that. But it's just common sense. If you don't spend money wisely, it's not going to do you any good. And when they talk about hoarding, sometimes hoarding, which is just a pejorative term, but I mean, sometimes saving, not spending money, is a very good idea. Better that, the economy needs savings. Savings is what really drives an economy over the long run. We need to save. We need to invest. Just the other day, President Obama said that rich people were saving too much money and that the tax code was encouraging them to save. So that was kind of standard Keynesian, ideas that somehow you had to get everybody spending. What that ignores is that it's saving that makes possible investing. And investing is the most important spending we do. So it's just all wrong-headed.
Okay. I agree with that, actually. Now, when you say spending, are you talking about government spending or individual spending? Say a stimulus check comes out. When they send it...
The Keynesians don't care.
Okay.
As long as it's spending, they don't care where it comes from. But their approach is that if private individuals are not spending, then the government will step in and spend for them.
Oh, okay. How do they tell?
If the economy is not doing well and if their unemployment rate is high, that means there's not enough spending. So the government will simply either borrow money and spend that or print money and spend that. That's the idea. And of course, they've done that in spades since 2008. In effect, they took a problem caused by too much debt, and they thought, well, we'll solve it by creating even more debt. And that's what we've done.
Yes, I understand that. I have also been watching that. I have the article that you were talking about. Obama targets wealthy who have too much money in individual retirement accounts. The Obama administration thinks too many wealthy people have been abusing the individual retirement account system by following the law and maxing out their contributions. It just goes on and on, doesn't it?
Well, of course, the money that goes in those individual retirement accounts is that it's saved, but then it's invested. And invested is exactly what we want. And if we're lucky, then the rich people that have saved and invested knew what they were doing, so that the investment will pay off for everybody and create jobs. That's how the economy advances. And ironically, it was Obama who said, when he first came into office, I'm going to move us from an era of borrow and spend to one of save and invest. But now he's saying he doesn't like savings. So we never know exactly what he thinks.
Yes. In fact, I have, let's see here, from the Wall Street Journal, December 8th, 2008, Barack Obama's ambitions for spending on the likes of roads, bridges, and jobless benefits keep growing. The latest leak puts it at $1 trillion over a couple of years, and the political class is embracing it as a miracle cure. Not to spoil the party, but this is not a new idea. Keynesian pump priming in a recession has often been tried, and as an economic stimulus, it is overrated. And
and then, of course, recently the president contradicted himself on that, too, because he said that the oil pipeline from Canada would only produce 50 jobs, which completely contradicts everything he's been saying about these shovel-ready projects.
All right, and they seem to have abandoned the shovel-ready project mantra, though I expect that to come around on the old subject train any time now. I have a list of things here that I would like to get answered tonight, and they're not specific questions. It's just basically an outline of 8 or 9 bullet items, and let me read them now. Number 1 is there any way to turn this overweight sinking ship around? Number 2 is there a way to stop the government, since they have apparently stopped listening to their employers and just keep showing up for work? And number 3 is obviously Obama and crew are not going to stop. Is there anyone that can be elected president that can stop this reign of stupid decisions? Number 4, is there a way for families, individuals, and businesses to weather the end of the super Keynesian cycle? Number 5 is since the Fed is using digital money and is pouring it into Wall Street where the money disappears into the hellhole of crony capitalists, is it even remotely possible that this time the Keynesian policies won't end up in hyperinflation? And number 6 is, since they are lying about most everything, including the unemployment rate, can they actually pull this off without hyperinflation by hiding the truth from the population? Number 7 is there a relationship between the NSA scandal and the crony capitalist system to control the population by holding the threat that comes with the government knowing about everything you do? And number 8 is, and I hope you correct me on this particular one, from Clinton for 8 years, the younger Bush for 8 years, Obama for 5 years, we have 21 years worth of this Keynesian system. If so, does the Keynesian model actually work when the economy is doing well?
And those are great questions, Bill.
Thanks. Like I said, it's just a basic outline, and I'm hoping during the conversation tonight we will be covering that through all the rest of the conversations that we're having. So we can. You want to tackle these questions now?
Sure.
Okay.
Where would you like to start?
We'll just start at number 1 and work our way down. Is there a way to turn this overweight sinking ship around?
Of my 2 books that we're talking about tonight, one of them is called Free Prices Now, and it has a very simple proposition that all you have to do to turn the economy around is for the government to stop interfering with, manipulating, and controlling prices. If they'll just get out of the business of controlling prices, this economy would turn right around and take off like a meteor. So it's really a very simple process. Now, getting them to do it is another problem. But that's the basic test. Are they interfering with, manipulating, and controlling prices in the economy? Because if so, the economy can't handle it. No economy can survive with that going on, particularly with the degree that's going on right now. Now, the average person might say, well, I didn't realize that the government was doing so much price controlling. But that's because it's hidden, it's disguised. For example, when the Federal Reserve manipulates and holds down interest rates, think about that for a minute. Interest rates are some of the most important prices in the economy. The 2 most important prices in the whole economy are the value of currency, like the dollar or the yen or the euro, and interest rates. Credit, borrowing, it's the use of money. I mean, these things are almost every economic transaction that takes place, they're involved. And if you're manipulating those interest rates, you're manipulating those prices, you're doing great harm to the economy. You're making it impossible for the buyers, the sellers, the business people, the consumers to really figure out what's going on. They're just operating in the dark because the information that they would normally get from free and honest interest rates is not available. So, yes, the economy could be turned around. It could be turned around rapidly. All it takes is a recognition of this basic principle. And then, of course, the other thing that I've been saying in these books is that the manipulation of prices, the interference within the price controls, they not only ruin the economy, but they also give rise to crony capitalism. But we can get to that.
Okay, I have in your book Free Prices Now, which is available for pre-order on Amazon.com, as well as Crony Capitalism, the other book that we're talking about tonight. I have page 183 up, which is, I believe, section 28, How the Fed Finances Government Growth. I believe this is what you were just talking about, isn't it?
Well, the Fed creates havoc in a lot of different ways. Certainly, one of the ways that it creates havoc is by financing the government, making it possible for the government to keep spending more and more and more, way beyond its means. And that's important, and it does it in a number of different ways. It keeps interest rates low so the government can afford to keep borrowing. It doesn't have to pay any interest, so why not just borrow some more money? It doesn't even stop there. It also buys the government's own debt. And of course, the Federal Reserve, which is a department of the government, is buying the government's debt, right? So the government is simply selling debt to itself. Who is the biggest owner of U.S. government debt today? It's actually the Federal Reserve. It's not China. It's not Japan. It's the Federal Reserve. So that's part of what they do, and it is without their doing that, the government could not keep running these massive deficits the way it does. So that's part of the problem. But there's an even bigger problem, which is that by keeping interest rates so low, the Fed is confusing the whole economy, destroying savings and investment, and just in general making it impossible for businessmen to make accurate decisions about how to invest their money.
Yes, I during the day, believe it or not, I have to work for a living, and the owner where I work is I've had many conversations with him about this, and all across industry, any industry that you're in, business owners got no idea what the heck to do. It's just it's holding the economy back. It's like some kind of a choke on the economy.
Now, normally, when interest rates are low for honest and truthful reasons, and that is to say the market is keeping them low, then that says to a businessman, well, go ahead and borrow. It's a good thing to do, and if you have a project that might return 5%, and you can borrow at 2%, that's a good thing to do. But if the government is artificially holding interest rates down to almost zero, and you go ahead and borrow that money and you invest, what's going to happen if the government stops repressing those interest rates and they start rising, and your loan suddenly becomes a 10% loan? You'll, of course, be destroyed. So nobody can really plan ahead or make good decisions under these conditions.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. I have just been, the people that are watching on the video stream, I've just been flipping through your book, Free Prices Now, and the section that we're talking about. And you've got some amazing facts and figures in this book. I encourage everybody to go out and get this book just as soon as you can. This is amazing. People need to start educating each other on our, in our everyday lives. Well, show people this book. Let's move on to question number 2, or point number 2 in my cavalcade of bullet list here. Is there a way to stop the government, since they have apparently stopped listening to their employers, which would be us, and they just keep showing up for work? They're not listening to us. They haven't been for years. What can, in your opinion, what can we do to stop them from doing all of this?
Well, you see, eventually, life will prevent them from doing all of this. Again, we caused the government created a bubble before the crash of 2008 by printing way too much money. There a lot of things went into it, but it was primarily the Federal Reserve printing way too much money and other central banks doing that. The bubble blew up. The government didn't want the bubble to blow up. In fact, the Federal Reserve took steps to try to save itself in 2007, but they just made it worse, so the bubble blew up. They couldn't control that. And then afterwards, of course, they just decided to print even more money, to create even more debt, kick the can down the road, to make the next crisis even worse. But there will be a next crisis. They can't control that. Just as they couldn't stop the crash of 2008, eventually there will be another crisis. And that could take many different forms, as you alluded to. It could take the form of hyperinflation, but it could of goods. We've already had hyperinflation of investment assets, homes and stocks and other things like that. But it could take the form of hyperinflation of what you buy at the grocery store and the department stores and things like that. Or it could take the form of another crash like 2008, only this time worse. And so that would stop the government. One would like to think that the government would pull back before creating these crises, but at least so far there's little evidence that would happen.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of seems like somebody has an agenda to do this type of thing on purpose.
Well, there's no not so much, of course, they don't want to create a crash. They don't necessarily want to create hyperinflation. But they do have things that they want to accomplish. So, I mean, Wall Street loves having the government print all this new money because the money comes to Wall Street. So Wall Street gets to sort of take its cut as it sends the money out through the rest of the economy. It also gets to speculate with it. So Wall Street makes a whole lot of money from it. I mean, for example, during the crash of 2008, Goldman Sachs was rescued through the TARP loans and through other programs and so on. But what was very little known was that they were also allowed to be treated as a bank for the first time. And being treated as a bank meant that they could now go to the Federal Reserve and borrow at negligible interest rates, and then use that money as they wished, in particular to speculate with. So this was just a gold mine for them. And after they paid back the TARP money, they said, okay, we're no longer dependent on the government. Well, they were still able to tap into the Federal Reserve, and they're still able to tap into this day. So, I mean, that's a tremendous opportunity for Wall Street. So naturally, Wall Street likes this blowing up of bubbles. They think it's a great thing. And then there are other people. So many people have gotten rich off all this government money printing that it creates quite a constituency in favor of its continuing. And of course, politicians like it because it enables them to go on with their deficit spending. They don't have to do anything that might actually annoy anybody. They can just win friends and influence people by spending. So there are a lot of constituencies in favor of a bubble until it blows up.
You said two interesting things that I wanted to ask you a question about, and the two questions are actually, I think, related. You said that, you said that Wall Street takes the money and they speculate with it. What do they speculate on, and does that mess with the markets when they do that speculation, and what is the bubble that is being inflated now, and are they doing that inflation on purpose?
And well, they certainly like the inflation of investment assets, because if the money that the Federal Reserve is printing goes into investment assets, then they get a lot richer. Right? They're the ones that own assets. The middle class owns some assets, but not a lot. The poor own no assets. So who is it? It's these people on Wall Street, I mean rich people in general, but especially these people who own the assets which will appreciate if stocks are going up, if homes are going up, and all this is great. So that they benefit from that. They're also repackaging this money. In other words, the money comes to them first, they're relending it, so they get a cut on it, and then, as I said, they're speculating with it as well. And because of they've got so much money to speculate with, all the Federal Reserve has to do is just murmur that it might do less money printing, and the stock market starts heading down. See, that's Wall Street money saying, no, we don't like that. We want to be fed with more and more money. That's not the average person running to sell stocks. That's the Wall Street speculators. So they kind of control the immediate reaction of the market. There is this complete misimpression that somehow Wall Street is the same thing as the market, or that Wall Street represents capitalism. No, I mean Wall Street represents a partnership between itself and the government, which is very crony capitalist in its origin and nature, and has nothing to do with capitalism. It's sort of ironic that the Occupy Wall Street people, they were picketing the New York Federal Reserve and saying this is the citadel of capitalism. Well, the Federal Reserve has nothing to do with capitalism. The Federal Reserve is all about manipulated and controlled prices, whereas markets left to themselves are about free prices controlled by consumers. That's what we need. We need an economy controlled by consumers, with consumers signaling what they want and what they don't want, and with producers responding to those signals appropriately.
And of course, they're not doing that right now because all the signals have static in them. Would that be a good phrase?
That's right.
And how?
Right. It has static at best. I mean, in many cases, the signals are completely obliterated. I mean, look at our medical system. Just as an example obliterated signals. I mean, when is the last time anybody saw an honest price in our medical system?
Not in my lifetime.
If you're right. I mean, imagine if grocery stores were run like the medical system. You'd go in the grocery store, none of the goods in the shelves would be priced. You wouldn't have any idea what they cost. Most of them would be not available that day. You have to get permission to buy them. Just for imagine what would happen to our ability to eat if the food business were run like the medical business. The prices have just been completely obliterated in medicine. And the only prices that really exist are ones that the government through Medicare has set. The government makes something like 7,500 prices initially in Medicare, but then they have every region is a little different price, and so it ends up being billions of prices that they're setting, none of which have any reality whatsoever, no connection to the consumer, no connection to consumer choice or preference, just all made up and all going up rapidly.
So, of course, I have to ask the next obvious question. Is this healthcare law that they passed, is that going to help, or is that going to make it worse? And I think I know the answer to that.
Well, yes. The consumer at the moment only controls about 7% of healthcare buying decisions, and with Obamacare that would go down even further. And in fact, Obamacare even has overt price controls that are built into it. And the overt price controls are very interesting because of the way the bill was written. It said that Congress could only change the price control system in a certain number of years, and it could only do so during a certain window of opportunity, and they couldn't change it again, and they couldn't change it if it raised prices. It's the most unbelievably unconstitutional thing. But that can't be tested in the courts until it actually happens.
So obviously they're delaying all of these portions and parts of it, and it's probably not productive tonight to get into a discussion about whether or not they're doing it legally or not. Everybody seems to have an opinion on that, but is there delaying?
Well, it wouldn't seem to be legal.
Obviously.
But the problem is with what's legal and what isn't, is that the government can only be sued if it says that it can be sued. There are all sorts of restrictions. There's this sovereignty doctrine which says the government cannot be sued unless they provide for a route to sue them. And so usually, if you try to go to court and say the government's doing something illegal, the courts will say you have no standing. Sorry, you can't sue.
Right. I think that is the responsibility of the state, isn't it?
You mean the states?
Yeah, the states themselves.
Well, sometimes they have standing, sometimes they don't have standing either.
And in this case, with the health care law, do they have standing at all? Does anybody have any standing besides the federal government?
Well, when this provision comes into force, where this committee would have price control authority, then when Congress has a chance to change it during this window, that's when somebody could sue. But not being a lawyer, I can't say exactly who would have standing. But it's very difficult to sue the federal government. And, of course, in addition, the federal government has all these resources to spend on lawyers, infinite amounts of money they can spend to defend themselves. And so they can easily bankrupt the suing party by just extending the litigation out indefinitely.
Yes, that is apparently is a very popular tactic with these people. I think at this point I want to back up and let's give the audience some definitions with what is Keynesian economics, and who was this guy, and was he like stark raving nuts or what, and what would be a good replacement, which I guess would be the Austrian model, and what exactly is crony capitalism. So if you want to take the Keynesian explanation first.
Yes. John Maynard Keynes was a British economist. He died in 1946. and he was an amazingly interesting person. He could out-talk and out-argue just about anybody. You know, people that knew him said he never dimmed his headlights. That seems a fair characterization. But he was also amazingly wrong. He's had more influence on economics and the way we manage the world than any other economist, even Karl Marx. Marx and Keynes have had the most influence, both for nothing good. So we've kind of moved beyond Marx, but we need to move beyond Keynes. The whole world is run on Keynesian principles. And at the risk of oversimplifying, at least in the context of the current today's situation, you could summarize Keynesian thought by saying if you have too much debt, if it's causing a crash, just load on more debt. It's perfectly okay for debt to grow faster than income indefinitely, and that you should print enough money to keep interest rates low, and if things are not going well, just make them even lower. Don't worry about blowing up bubbles. There's no such thing as a bubble. Eventually, he actually wanted to cut interest rates to zero, eventually hold them there at zero forever, which of course is equivalent to giving away money. If you can borrow money for zero, then the people are just giving it to you, of course. But that was his idea. And then he also thought that borrowing and spending, not saving, create prosperity, which is entirely backward. Of course, it's saving and investment that in the long run creates prosperity, not borrowing and spending. And if you do borrow, you better borrow wisely and use the money wisely. But he didn't think that was necessary. Just any spending was fine. So that's the basic program, and that's the way the world has been run, and not just the United States, because politicians like these ideas. It means that they're subject to no disciplines. They can print as much money. They can print money, they can borrow, they can spend without restraint, because they can always say, oh, it's justified by Keynesian economics. We're just doing this to help the economy, not to get ourselves elected, whereas in fact they're doing it to get themselves elected.
So, was obviously, I mean, even me as a layperson, using logic, I see that his theory is wrong. I mean, it's obviously wrong. What was he? Did he have some type of a mental affliction or something, or was he just miseducated?
Well, it's also interesting because he said at one point in a letter to the governor of the Bank of England, you know, everything I say is mathematically verifiable, which is complete nonsense. Nothing actually supports it. Logic does not support it. Evidence does not support it. But even so, many, many intelligent people are deep-dyed Keynesians today. The establishment around the world, the governing classes around the world are Keynesian. They're Keynesian both because it serves their interests. In the case of politicians, it helps them win elections. In the case of Wall Street, as I alluded to, it helps them make money in the short term before it all collapses, of course. So, you know, people have vested interest for believing it, and they've been taught it in school, and they don't question it. So for whatever reason, even though it completely defies common sense, it is the reigning paradigm today. It's what people in power believe.
So, is the Keynesian methodology of doing economics, is that something that's ingrained into the human condition? I mean, is that a natural state since everybody seems to fall back to that? Or is it something, or is it a made-up type of a system?
It kind of comes back to the idea of sustainability. Environmentalists always tell us that we need to think in sustainable terms. We need to stop thinking about, you know, this week and next month and start thinking about the long run. You know, what is the long-run consequence of our actions? But what they don't consider, the same people turn around in economics, and they don't consider that what Keynes is offering them is a complete lack of sustainability. It's kind of the adolescent idea. In fact, Keynes said, in the long run, we are all dead, meaning, you know, don't worry about the long run. And that's, you know, that whole idea that we don't need to worry about the long run is what drives it. The difference, as we all become adults, hopefully we realize that the difference between being an adult and a kid is that an adult considers the long run. An adult considers the consequences, and a kid doesn't usually do so. The kid's usually thinking about right now. But that's how we're running the economy, basically just right now. So it feels good to borrow and spend and to keep doing that, even though it's making things worse. Now, that's typical of human beings. Human beings do have trouble thinking about the long term, but hopefully as adults we learn to start to do that.
One could hope so, but that just kind of...
But politicians are the least likely to think about the long term because, of course, they have the election coming right up, and that's all they're focused on. Keynes talked about the long views of politicians and how politicians were the only ones who consider the welfare of everybody. That's all nonsense. I mean, they're all focused on the next election. And I think he knew that because he also said disparaging things about politicians in private. He said once they're utter boobies, but then he turned around and in other places act as if they were the wise counselors whom we can entrust our future to.
A regular dichotomy of opinions he had.
Well, he was famous for contradicting himself. In fact, one of his great critics, Hayek, another economist, said, "I always regretted not writing a book refuting, Keynesian thought as presented in the General Theory, which is the most important book, but I didn't do it because Keynes kept changing his mind every few years, so I thought he's sure to repudiate himself in a few years, and why bother?" But unfortunately, he died in 1946, and so he didn't repudiate himself, and Hayek should have written the book.
That's actually rather amusing, if it wasn't so depressing to think about. So let's explain to us what the other economic model that we were all discussing in 2008, and that would be the Austrian model. Is that right?
Right.
And what is that?
Well, there are different schools of economics. There's the Keynesian, there's the monetarist, the supply side, the Austrian, and so on. But the Austrian is the clearest and purest opponent of the Keynesian approach. So everything that Keynes says, they say pretty much the reverse. So whereas he says, if you have too much debt causing a crash, then just load on more debt, they say that's nonsense. And what you need to do is reduce the debt, and you need to be sure that any future debt is intelligent and high quality and not just quantity, and all those sort of basic points. And they point out that you can't just grow debt faster than income indefinitely, and they certainly don't think that borrowing and spending create prosperity. They think that saving and investing creates prosperity. So everything that Keynes says, they're pretty much on the opposite side. And that they're also believers that the economy can right itself and create prosperity if we don't interfere with prices, which is the main point that I've made in one of my books. If you'll just leave prices alone, the economy will do fine. The guy that came up with it, he was, Ludwig von Mises? Is that how you pronounce his name? Well, yes, von Mises. Austrian economics goes back a long way to people before von Mises, but von Mises is the sort of the guiding light of Austrian economics today. He's the most important figure. And he was a contemporary of Keynes, and his ideas were getting to be dominant before Keynes came along and kind of blew them out. And Keynes succeeded in doing that because, again, he was so popular with politicians who liked this idea of not being subject to any discipline anymore, being able to spend as much as they wanted to. They liked that. So the Mises no longer was sort of the leading authority. Keynes took his place. The other problem that Mises had was that he was an Austrian and he was writing in German, and he wasn't doing much in English, so his ideas only came into the English world, American and English world, kind of late. But Friedrich Hayek was his student, and he helped to bring those ideas into the English-speaking world.
Oh, excellent. Austrianism
is what was in virtual eclipse. It was really just completely on the outs. It had no standing in American universities, and for for decades after World War II, but in recent years it has come back. It's come really roaring back, and it's still persona non grata in most of the leading university economic departments, but it is gradually insinuating himself back into the discussion. There are people in Wall Street who believe in it. There are people in academia who believe in it. So it's really on the rebound, and it's high time, because it's high time for common sense to return to the management of economics in our economy.
And I have, to illustrate that, I have a quote from von Mises, which actually comes from the website, and I don't remember the name of it. Maybe you do, because you have done a few columns.
Mises.org, probably?
Yep, Mises.org.
Right.
Here his rule: the first job of an economist is to tell governments what they cannot do. Now, wasn't Ronald Reagan a proponent of this?
Ronald Reagan was kind of a mixed bag when it came to his economics.
Mm-hmm.
He had a basic faith in free markets and in getting the government out of it, not over-regulating, not controlling too much. So he had a basic idea, which was very much in keeping with Austrianism. But his most immediate influences were people like Milton Friedman or other economists who were not Austrians. Now, Milton Friedman, was a free market kind of guy in general, but when it came to interest rates, for example, he didn't have the picture properly. He actually thought that it was a good idea for the Federal Reserve to create money during a crash, and he even thought that the Federal Reserve should have created more money during the Great Depression, things like that, which are not consistent with Austrianism. And as good as Ronald Reagan was in so many things, and as good as his instincts were in economics, he actually appointed Alan Greenspan to be chairman of the Fed. And Alan Greenspan is the person who began the fall of the Fed into some of the worst habits, and which then led to the dot-com bubble, which then, of course, led to the housing bubble. So that was one of the worst appointments that Ronald Reagan ever made.
Everybody makes mistakes, I guess.
Yes.
Over at the Mises.org, MISES.org, there is a free book. It is called The Theory of Money and Credit by Ludwig von Mises, translated into English. So that would be an excellent primer for people to pick up. I am currently beginning to read it, and hopefully it doesn't make me too depressed by considering what could have been in our economy. And the final definition, we've been talking about the differences between the Austrian and Keynesian model, and one of your upcoming books is called Crony Capitalism in America, 2008 through 2012. Can you explain to us exactly what crony capitalism is, and give us some examples of that?
Sure. So when government takes control of the economy, as it has done increasingly, it's taken control of Wall Street. And when I say it's taking control of Wall Street, I have to qualify that, because as the government takes over Wall Street more and more, what also happens is that Wall Street takes over government more and more. They just integrate. They become kind of one and the same. They're influencing each other. People go back and forth from one to the other. But in any case, as government intrudes into the economy more and more, takes over the financial system, takes over the medical system, and so on, more and more of our economic decisions, of course, are made through government. That in turn means that private interests have an incentive to try to get control of government, to try to influence government. So they come in and they say, well, how can we influence government? Of course, we can do that best by making campaign contributions. So the level of campaign money, sharply increases, and you have these partnerships. And what do the private interests want when they come to government? What they want above all is government interventions in the economy, which will make them rich, or which will help them in some way. In the case of labor unions, it isn't to make them rich, but it's to make them richer at least. So naturally, as government gets bigger and bigger and has a bigger and bigger share of the economy, it's just an inevitability that more corruption is created because private interests try to influence, control government, and buy government, and that creates crony capitalism. And unfortunately, as the government has printed more and more and more money, it has become clear to very smart rich people that the way to get rich today is to get control of some of that newly printed money from the government, or to make other deals with government, to get grants from government. I mean, that's the way to riches. So it's no longer I can get rich by offering consumers a better product at a cheaper price that is to serve consumers, can serve my fellow man. That's how I'm going to get rich, which is the ideal of markets. No, the way to get rich is to be close to government and get some of that newly created money, or to get their grants, or to get a piece of the deficit spending, to get them to create a monopoly for me. And that's crony capitalism, and it is absolutely helping to destroy our economy. You start with these bad economic policies that destroy the price system, which bring government into the economy more and more, and then that leads to crony capitalism and corruption, and that just makes it worse and worse. There's nothing worse for an economy than that kind of corrupt crony capitalism. There's nothing worse for the future of the middle class or for the poor people. They just can't make it. It's only the crony capitalists who are able to make it in that environment, and that's happening right now.
So that's the widening rift between the haves and the have-nots, or as
yes, I mean, you read articles by people who are saying, you know, there's growing inequality. Well, there's a lot of problems with the inequality statistics that the government produces, so it's not as clear as they would say. But nevertheless, you can just feel that there is growing inequality. But what is the source of it? It's not that the rich people are squeezing the poor people. It's that some people are getting rich through methods which are corrupt. That's the problem. It's the crony capitalism that's the problem. It's not capitalism. It's crony capitalism. You know, you quoted Bono about capitalism helps more people out of poverty than government programs, but it has to be capitalism. It can't be crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is a negative-sum game that just destroys capital, and destroys an economy, and makes everybody poor in the long run. Even the crony capitalists, in the long run, will suffer from this, but they're making so much money at the moment that they don't think about that.
Okay, that's obvious. Now, in your book, Crony Capitalism, there is a section in there that all of my conspiracy theorist friends are going to love, and it will probably help sell a lot of books on the show tonight. Part 4 is, you call that crony food, Monsanto's massive experiment with our health. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Sure. Monsanto has just had an amazing record of being able to influence the government and get the government to do its bidding, which has helped to make Monsanto much richer. There was a Monsanto employee whom then went to the FDA, and in the FDA he wrote all sorts of regulations which helped Monsanto sell its products, and which some of these regulations, honestly, they for example required that if you use growth hormones with cows to raise cows and so on, if you didn't use them, rather, you couldn't label your milk growth hormone free, or if you did, you'd have to use a statement from the FDA saying that growth hormone free milk was absolutely identical to any other milk, and that this was sort of a specious claim. So you were required to say this, even though it was false. And if a private company had tried to put a label on their milk like that, they would have been sued for fraud. But because the government was requiring you to do it, you see, you had to do it. So this employee, got those kind of rules and so on. Then he went back to Monsanto. Then he went to the agriculture department, where he wrote all sorts of regulations. and he stopped studies of genetically modified foods. So there were people in the USDA that wanted more study of it, so to be sure it was safe. He stopped that, and so because Monsanto was producing this kind of seed and so on. Then after USDA went back to Monsanto, and then after that he went back to the FDA, and he's now at the FDA right now. He's the Deputy Commissioner for Food under Obama, the same guy. So the same guy who's really representing Monsanto is in charge of everything the FDA does on our food.
Incidentally, folks, if we have any connection problems with Blog Talk Radio during our discussions tonight, I will use the landline to dial back in, and the show will continue, and our guest will be the host if I happen to get disconnected accidentally. Notice my air quotes around the word accidentally. The guy's name is Michael Taylor, isn't it?
Right.
Yep. I'm looking, the folks watching the video side.
Really an amazing story that Monsanto was able to pull this off. But it shows how, companies, private interests in general, it isn't just companies, it's also trial lawyers and labor unions and lots of other people, can insinuate themselves in the government, get government to do their bidding, and make money from it.
It is stunningly amazing what they have been able to pull off, especially Monsanto. It is just...
Monsanto, by the way, had a rating from this world organization as the least ethical company in the world.
That's amazing. And they make the most food.
Well, they're a very big food producer.
That's very concerning for the safety of people's health, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of other these crony deals that threaten our health. I mean, that's only one example.
What are some other examples?
Well, another example would be that there was a woman who was in charge of the National Institute of Health who they developed a vaccine, which is used for the papillomas virus, initially for teenage girls and now for boys. They licensed that vaccine to Merck, and then, of course, the government approved that vaccine and began to promote it to the states and tell states to, you need to make this mandatory and so on, all run by this woman. And then, of course, that vaccine has had a lot of questions about it, a lot of adverse events and so on reported to it. The government refuses to study those adverse events to see, what's behind them or whether the vaccine is really safe. And so meanwhile, the woman who was behind all this then went to Merck, of course, and became president of their vaccine division. So that's about what you would expect.
That's just crazy.
But it's pure crony capitalism.
That is, folks, that is your examples of crony capitalism. And as hard as it is to believe, we have actually reached the end of the first hour of the show. So what I'm going to do, with our, if our guest agrees, is play a little song here while we all take a break and get up and walk around for a little bit. How does that sound to you, Hunter?
Sounds good.
Okay, this music will play for 2 minutes and 44 seconds. So we'll be back in about 2.5 minutes or so. And I'm going to put us both on mute so that if you need to cough or something like that, it won't go out over the air. And we will be back in about 2.5 to 3 minutes, okay?
Good.
Excellent. And we are back after our brief musical break. While we're on break, I went upstairs, and the wife is asleep on the couch with all 3 cats. They look so cute, it's unbelievable. So we are back, and a lot of people ask me how exactly I am able to do this with broadcasting the audio, having the all of the information that I have that I broadcast by video all over the place. And what I do is I have actually have 4 computers running at the same time here. I have one with our script on it that I refer to so that I can ask the guest questions. I've got one that actually connects up to Blog Talk and broadcasts the video. And I've got another one that has the Blog Talk chat and the control room up so that everything works seamlessly. I really have no idea how I do it, but I do. And I've got the 4th computer has all of the sound effects and everything on it, what they call a cart machine. So, for instance, when I say something completely wrong, you can hear some really cool sound effects like this. And that's how we do the show. So we are back. Hunter, are you there?
Yes, indeed.
Excellent. I gave you a couple of extra seconds there. So we have actually been able to work up to number 3 on my cavalcade of questions here. And the third one is, I'm not sure if you're going to be comfortable talking about it or not. And that is this. Obviously, this crew that we have right now is not going to stop their Keynesian maniacal spending, whatever the heck they're doing there in Washington. Is there anyone right now that you can think of that can stop this? Is there somebody that we can elect president or push for to be pushed into the public light to begin educating the public, the low information voters, as Rush Limbaugh calls them? Is there anyone you can think of?
Well, first of all, I think a good way to summarize what they're doing in economic terms is they're printing, that is, printing money, borrowing, and spending. That's the program. Print money, borrow from yourself, and spend. And what's going to stop that? Well, certainly, Mitt Romney did not represent an alternative to that program. In fact, when he was developing his campaign, he hired as his 2 chief economic advisors 2 people who were very respectable economists, and who had been in the Bush White House running the Council of Economic Advisors, but who were thoroughgoing Keynesians. So it was Romney signaled from the very beginning, I'm not going to be any different. I'm going to continue the same Keynesian policies. So he certainly didn't represent an alternative. Now, will there be an alternative 4 years from now? I don't know. I mean, obviously, it isn't likely that, Hillary Clinton certainly would not be an alternative. She would represent Keynesian policies. There could be Republicans nominated who would also represent Keynesian policies. There is one person who is talked about for president who would not represent Keynesian policies, and that is Rand Paul. So, that's if it might be hard for him to be nominated, but if he did, he would represent something different.
Let me ask you a question. You're far more educated on this than I could ever hope to be. What, as we go forward here, because we have the midterms in 2014, and then obviously we have the presidential election in 2016, if we all last that long. What keywords, what phrases do these supporters of Keynesian economics use? What keywords can we all listen for to put a big red X through their name?
Well, I think it's been fascinating. For example, President Obama, and he got this from the President of France, President Hollande, and various other world leaders who have picked this up. They no longer talk about stimulus or spending. Have you noticed how the word stimulus has disappeared?
Yes.
They have simply substituted the word growth for that. So they talk about growth policies. need more growth policies. And what that actually means is stimulus, which in turn means spending, which in turn means either borrowing, from, in the case of the U.S., from China or Japan, to spend, or it means printing the money from thin air and then spending that money. And of course, that's very, I didn't explain in the first half that, that's so damaging to the economy. You can't just print money and expect it to not affect the economy. Think of it in simple terms. If you had, if the current economy were $3 and 3 apples, then let's say each apple is worth $1. But if you print 3 more dollars and now they're $6, then the price of the apple is going to rise to $2. So all else being equal, you're going to get a lot of inflation out of that. But in any case, the program which Obama would obviously pursue if he was allowed to, which he said, is he wants more stimulus, more deficit spending, more growth, quote unquote, and he likes all the money printing that the Federal Reserve is doing. I mean, that's it's very interesting that he reappointed President Bush's Fed chairman, Ben Bernanke, because he liked all the money printing that he was doing. So that's another thing to keep in mind, that Alan Greenspan was a Republican appointment by Reagan, Ben Bernanke was a Bush appointment, and in both cases they were then reappointed by Democrats. Clinton reappointed Greenspan, and of course Obama reappointed Bernanke.
Now, the printing aspect of it, and this might actually get us a little bit into the weeds here, but does this hold true even when they're printing digital money? I mean, they're not printing real dollars.
Yeah,
they're using digital money.
Right. In the 1920s, the German government just printed money. They literally just printed Deutschmarks, and that led to the great inflation in Germany that wiped out the middle class and led to Hitler coming into power eventually.
That'd be the Weimar Republic.
That's what they did, in those days. But today we don't just print dollars. We create electronic money. And we don't need to get into the technicalities of that. But, just as the President talks about growth policies when what he means is deficit spending and borrowing and printing money, we also have these terms, these circumlocutions that we use for money printing. Nobody in the Fed or government ever calls it money printing, of course. They don't want people to know what's going on. So the term now is quantitative easing. And that's a euphemism for printing money. And then the press loves to use the bond buying as what they say. They say the Fed is bond buying. But what they don't tell you is that they're going out and buying bonds in the market with money that they've just created out of thin air. That's not mentioned. So you have the major media, of course, in collaboration with the government to avoid using truthful terms.
So when the next question that I have is, once they get done doing this money printing, they have to draw the money back in or remove it from the system. And is that what they mean by the velocity of the money?
No, but velocity refers to how fast money passes through the economy. And I don't think we need to get into that too much, but right now the velocity of money is very low, so that means that the Fed prints all this money, but the money is not being used very heavily.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, most of the money that the Fed has printed is still sitting in the Fed, representing reserves for banks that banks could draw on to make more loans. So if they wanted to, they could make trillions of dollars of loans from the reserves that have been created by the Fed for them. Now, most people say, and I don't want to get too technical here, but most people say that money is not doing any real harm to the economy because it's just sitting in the Fed right now. It could harm the economy if it got out and caused inflation. But hey, it's just sitting in the Fed, don't worry about it. But what they don't understand is that money can also be used to support derivative creation by the banks. It's capital that counts against derivatives, so that it has encouraged banks to create trillions of dollars of derivatives. These are very exotic financial instruments, which Warren Buffett called financial instruments of mass destruction, because if they go wrong, they can bring down the whole economy. So it's not true that all this money that the Fed has been printing is just sitting there harmlessly. And of course, that's the bank money. But in addition, there's the money that's been used to simply buy bonds from the government to finance the government deficits.
Are the derivatives the next bubble? Do you think?
And derivatives are a threat to the system, but they're not the bubble per se. There is a bubble right now going on, in the sense that there's too much money floating around the economy being used for speculative purposes, and at the moment it seems to have latched onto the stock market. I mean, you've noticed how stock prices have gone up,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in 2013. So all this newly created money flows into financing the government deficit. The government deficit flows out in the economy, and one way or the other, the money ends up, at the moment, being used to buy stocks and floating the stock market. And that's why the stock prices are very high now and probably unsustainable.
So the bubble is the speculative investing that they're doing. So
Right.
and when that bubble bursts, obviously the economy is going to contract again. We'll get in another recession and all of that stuff. Which leads me to number 4 in my list of points. What can and is there a way for families, individuals, and small businesses to weather the end of the super Keynesian cycle on the crony capitalism roller coaster? In other words, what can people do to mitigate the pain that obviously is going to be coming again when this bubble bursts? And the reason why I ask that is I know people that after the 2008 thing, they declared bankruptcy. They lost their houses. They lost basically everything because they had made bad decisions. What kind of good decisions can people make right now to keep themselves and their families safe?
Yes, it's very important, because we've got to protect the middle class and to the degree we can the poor, from the destruction of all these toxic policies that are coming out of Washington, and along with the crony capitalism that accompanies it. So, first of all, to the degree possible, people should try to reduce debt. They should have as little debt as they can. Now, that's easier said than done, because under current conditions, with real incomes falling, with jobs so hard to get, how do you reduce debt? But insofar as you can, you should reduce it. You should certainly not take on any more. If you have a choice between buying a bigger house or buying a house in the first place, you shouldn't do it. You should try to be prudent and not get too in debt. So that's number one. The second thing, of course, is to save. Try to have some cash. But then the third thing is to try to own something which would go up if we had a lot of inflation. The obvious thing is gold. And gold is selling rather cheaply right now. It's gone down quite a bit. Speculators are not into gold at the moment, so that creates a price opportunity. The advantage of the cash is that if we have a crash like 2008, then cash is king. You can either buy goods or stocks cheaply, or you can just survive with your cash. If we have a hyperinflation, your cash will be worth less and less. But if you have some other asset which is going to inflation-proof you, like gold or a house or land or something like that, then that's good too. So the ideal scenario for the people who can do it is to keep debt down to as little as possible, have some cash, have some gold or other hard assets, and certainly don't buy bonds, because bonds are one of the most dangerous things done right now, because the government has repressed interest rates. At some point, when the government can no longer repress interest rates, they could easily rise, particularly if you had a hyperinflation. And then your bond holdings would be worth nothing. You would be wiped out.
I'm actually glad you said all of that, because what I did back before 2008, because it was so obvious there was a bubble, because I remember back in 2007, and folks, I'm just not rattling on here. This is a real-world example of what somebody did when they recognized what was going on. I'd be driving down the road, every day on a daily basis. And I'd see these houses, obviously $250,000, maybe a $500,000 house. And each one of them had 2, 3, maybe 4 brand new vehicles, SUVs, sports cars. And I remember thinking, there is no possible way that this many people could be making that much money that they could afford all of those goodies. And I was right. We had the bubble, and everything contracted, and now these people are driving used cars just like I am. So what I did, my wife and I did, is we got rid of as much debt as we possibly could. Basically, right now, all we have is our mortgage, and I think we're financing the dental work that she had to have done. We had cash savings, in other words, not only in the bank, but also hard physical cash that we kept on hand. And when I saw the inflation spiral in the food market starting to start up, I took a bunch of that cash and I bought food that would keep for quite a long time, by putting chicken and whatnot in the freezer, buying steaks, things like that, because you could see the food prices are going to go up. I bought a boatload of silver, which right now doesn't seem like it was a good idea, but the silver prices are rebounding. I mean, that's a hard, tangible asset there. And
it's probably higher than when you bought it anyway.
No, I bought it, unfortunately, at $30.
No, I see.
So we're only $7 away from the peak where I bought it.
Well, silver is a very volatile asset. It moves up and down so fast that it could easily be back to where you bought it.
Yeah, I mean, it could go up to $40, and obviously if it does, I'll probably cash out a bunch of that silver. But those are the 3 things that we did, and interestingly, folks, those are the 3 things that Hunter just told us that we need to do to mitigate the next bubble that's coming. So listen to what this guy is telling you. It will keep you safe. You don't want to declare bankruptcy. Trust me on that. You don't want to declare bankruptcy.
Because what causes most bankruptcy is too much debt.
Right.
That's what strangles people.
So those 3 things that we did we do good?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Whew. Boy, am I glad about that. Okay.
And if your silver goes up, you might just hold it because you want to be protected for the long run. It's like I was talking about, we all have to think long run, not just short run.
Yes, we have to think like adults, not like the children that are running the Keynesian system. In other words, if, say, this whole thing blows up, say the next bubble just totally ruins the economy, folks, and, we get ultra hyperinflation where that dollar you have won't even buy you a slice of bread. Having a hard asset like gold or silver is a tangible good. You can actually use that as currency. Is that right? Am I thinking right along those lines?
You can't legally use it as currency. Of course, the government doesn't allow you to do that.
Right.
But the point is that the price will go up. They can't create more and more gold while they're creating more and more dollars. So therefore, if you triple the number of dollars around, then the price of gold is going to go up, and therefore protect you.
Right. That's why I put most of it in coins.
Now, I mean, there are other things that are protective too. I mean, like a house can protect you.
Right.
Anything real like that can protect you. So if you get to the point where $1 won't buy a slice of bread, then obviously houses will cost a lot more than they do now.
Right. And if the dollar doesn't buy a slice of bread, it's a good thing you bought all of that flour to put in your cabinet to make your own bread when the prices were inexpensive. So it just seemed to make sense to me. Right. The next item on the list here is highly theoretical, I think, and it goes along with what you were just talking about when we were talking about the digital dollars and everything. Since the Fed is using digital money and is pouring it into Wall Street, or apparently it's going right now, where the money disappears into the hellhole of crony capitalists, is it even remotely possible that when this Keynesian policies blows up or goes bad, that it won't end in hyperinflation? In other words, it's all digital money, so can they actually control the hyperinflation? Is that possible?
It can end in one of 2 ways. It can end in a Great Depression kind of situation, or it can end in a hyperinflation. Although hyperinflation doesn't last, so it usually, in the end, creates a depression. I mean, there are all sorts of possibilities. You can have a depression, you can have a great inflation, You can even have an inflationary depression. Now, the United States has not had too many inflationary depressions, but there have been, in South America, that's been a kind of a fairly normal phenomenon, where jobs collapse and yet the prices are going up anyway. So, a lot of people will say you have to have one or the other, but you can actually have both during the crisis.
Isn't that sort of, not hyperinflation, but an inflationary spiral that we've had over the past few years? We were talking before we came on the air tonight that I am one of those people, I'm the guy that's wandering around the grocery store with the calculator adding everything up. And I remember my food prices because I shop for the best deals in food. I remember in 2008 I was getting whole chickens for 28 cents a pound, and now they're over $1. I was getting chicken thighs for like 45 cents, and now it's $1.50, almost $1.75. The price of beef has gone up. The price of all the foods have gone up. And, of course, in 2008, the economy contracted. We lost all the jobs, hardly any of which have come back yet. Isn't, on a miniature scale, sort of, isn't that what we experienced in the 2008 bubble bursting and the recession?
Well, when a bubble bursts and you have a recession, it tends to drive prices down. So the cost of food, energy, all those things actually went down at that moment. So it can go either way. But the first thing to realize is that since the Federal Reserve was created, the dollar has gone down about 97%. There's inflation there's been so much inflation that you only get 3 cents worth of goods for for $1 now. When John D. Rockefeller Sr. used to give a kid a dime, back in 1910 or whatever it was, a dime was a lot of money. You could buy a whole lot with it. But now that dollar is virtually worthless because of all the inflation that the Fed has created through its money printing. Now, these periods of inflation, sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's better. What Ronald Reagan, of course, got provisions saying that Social Security would be tied to inflation, so that if the CPI went up, the Consumer Price Index, then Social Security payments would go up, and a lot of other things were indexed to inflation that way. So, of course, then what happened is that the government decided, well, in that case, we'll just change the way we measure inflation. So they began to, particularly under Clinton, not surprisingly, they began to adjust the system for figuring inflation, unemployment, so on quite a bit. And if you still had the same inflation measurement system that you had under Reagan, inflation would be a whole lot higher now. And unemployment, by the way, would also be a whole lot higher. If we measured unemployment the way they did during the Great Depression, it would be at Great Depression levels today. But because the measurement has changed, it seems to be lower. So almost everybody makes that mistake. They say, well, at least we're not in a Great Depression. Well, if we measured it the way they did, then we would be. And the other thing the Federal Reserve does is that in addition to relying on these distorted government inflation figures, but they just arbitrarily say, we will ignore inflation of food or energy because that changes too often. We'll just look at the rest. Of course, what happens when food and energy are going up is that people have less to spend. They have to worry about how they're going to make ends meet, so they spend less on other items, and so inflation is actually reduced in those other items that the Fed acknowledges while food and energy are going up. So isn't it nice for the Fed? They can say there's almost no inflation now, whereas there is, in fact, consumer price inflation going on.
Yes, I have. I've actually been having that drummed into my head every single day by Rush Limbaugh for the past, I think, 6 years now, and he says the exact same thing that you say. It's uncanny that two.
Well, it happens to be true.
Yeah, I mean, two renowned experts agree on something like that. That is quite big kudos for both of you guys.
And isn't it surprising that that the major changes are made under the Clinton administration,
Yeah.
Given the President Clinton's reputation for honesty. But under Obama, they just announced that they were going to change the way that they calculate gross economic growth. And one of the things they said, for example, was that they were going to now count contributions, what was owed to retirement funds were going to be counted as if they'd been paid to the retirement fund. Okay, so if let's say the state government owes, $1 billion to its retirement fund and hasn't paid it, well, okay, it's going to be counted as if it had been paid. Doesn't that make sense? Under present conditions, when the big question is whether they'll ever be able to pay those retirement funds.
That's insane.
But we're going to just count them as part of economic growth now.
So
kind of shocking, isn't it?
Down is up is down, black is white.
Exactly. At the very moment in which it's not clear that these retirement payments will ever be made, they're going to be counted as if they had been made.
So,
and not only that, the pension systems in this country are getting in more and more perilous shape, partly because the Federal Reserve is holding down interest rates, and so the pension funds can't get any return on their investments, their bond investments. So that's actually eroding pension funds at the same time that they decided to count anything owed to pensions as if it had been paid.
Can't they raise their interest rates just a little bit? Kind of put the brakes on just a little bit?
Thank you about that.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, just to underline the lack of logic behind it, supposedly having lower interest rates is going to increase spending. That's the idea. People will borrow more, and they'll spend that money, and that will help the economy. But what's actually happening is that people don't earn any interest on their savings, so they don't save as much, and the interest that they didn't get on their savings would have been bigger than the amount that they're spending through the lower interest rate borrowing. So it's all just backfiring, in that even in Keynesian terms, it's creating less demand and less spending. It's not working.
And
but heaven forbid that would be acknowledged. Instead, the Fed just continues on its way. Refuses to admit that it's failed even on its own terms.
Plus, the businesses can't hire people because they don't know what's going to happen with this healthcare stuff, and they can't borrow money because the banks are holding on to it. So it's basically a cycle that's feeding upon itself, isn't it?
Yes, and another reason that the banks are reluctant to lend money, partly the banks are just scared, but another considerable reason the banks are afraid to lend money is the artificially low interest rates. The banks are afraid that they'll make a loan and then interest rates will go up, and then their loan will look bad.
I see.
It will reduce their capital. So if interest rates were a little higher, then banks would actually start to lend among themselves and start to lend to businesses much more readily. So that's backfiring also.
So the
Fed has really been sort of the gang that can't shoot straight, and yet they just go merrily on, and it looks like the next Fed chairman will endorse more of the same.
That's not surprising at all. The title of your book, Free Prices Now, Fixing the Economy by Abolishing the Fed. I think this would be an excellent part of the conversation to talk about the subject matter in the book, Abolishing the Fed. How can we go about that?
Well, of course, we had no Federal Reserve for much of American history. A central bank was created, and another central bank that was abolished by Andrew Jackson, and he had a hard time abolishing it, but he did succeed in doing so. And one of the main reasons he abolished it was he said that he thought he was creating crony capitalism.
Huh.
And this is all the way back in the early 19th century. And he said, this is corrupting Congress, this is corrupting our businesses, I need to get rid of this. He succeeded in doing so. So we had no Federal Reserve, we had no central bank until 1913 when the current Fed was created. So we went all that time without a Fed. So in my view, by far the best thing would be to abolish the Fed, get rid of the central bank. When the Soviet Union fell, most people said central planning doesn't work, price fixing in the center doesn't work, And yet, the Fed represents central planning, price fixing, all these things that we should have learned from the Soviet Union don't work. There it is in the Fed. So let's just get rid of it and go back to the status quo before, where there was no central bank. Now, I think that there's some other banking reforms that would be useful as well. That if we did a complete sweep of banking reform, particularly increasing the reserve requirements of banks and abolish the Fed, we could actually stop this cycle of recession boom bust that we've been in for a long, long time. So it isn't just a question of abolishing the Fed, but that would be a big step forward.
So we know that the obviously this boom bust cycle that we've been on for so long is it's like in a prize fight. The fighter is staggered, but he's not quite down yet. In your book, the Free Money Now, pardon me, towards the end of the book, there are a lot of chapters and sections that I found are extremely interesting that people should read. So can we go through a few of those towards the end of your book? Maybe
Sure.
five of them, because we got about a half an hour left, and obviously I'm going to get.
Sure.
I haven't actually gotten to any of the questions that I had for you tonight, believe it or not. Okay, section 20 is titled "Baby Steps in the Right Direction." What type of baby steps are you talking about? And for the folks that are watching this, either the replay on YouTube or the live video stream, you see that I actually have that chapter of his book up here so that you can sample it as we talk about it. So what kind of baby steps in the right direction are we talking about here, Hunter?
Well, it helps to review a little recent history. For example, for a long time, from the Great Depression on, there was a rule that said that banks could not own brokers and investment banks, and investment banks could not own banks. In other words, there was an attempt to separate the more speculative aspects of Wall Street from the people who took deposits and made loans. That was repealed. It's called Glass-Steagall, and that was repealed. Why was that repealed? Well, you had a former head of Goldman Sachs who was the Secretary of the Treasury at the time under Clinton, and he orchestrated the repeal of that. So it's been pointed out that that was not a great idea. Then, of course, we had another former head of Goldman Sachs, Secretary of the Treasury, during the crash in the Bush White House, and he orchestrated the rescue of Goldman Sachs. He did it through somewhat devious means. He was not supposed to, because he had worked at Goldman Sachs, he was not supposed to have the right to talk to Goldman Sachs, so he just went to the ethics office and said, oh, we need to waive this because Goldman Sachs is so important. So then he gets to talk to the president of Goldman Sachs 20 times a day, as the phone logs show, and they work out this rescue plan for Goldman Sachs in particular. So, Goldman Sachs is just got an incredible position in the government. They have people going into the government, coming back to them all the time. They have this network that's extremely powerful. It would no doubt be better to not to go back to Glass-Steagall, but that's what I would characterize as a baby step, or increasing the bank reserve requirements so that banks are a little less vulnerable. That would be helpful. But by the way, I should just add that this whole idea that some banks and some institutions are too big to fail, that if they failed, that would send the economy in a nosedive that couldn't be arrested, that's completely fallacious. If in 2008 the Wall Street firms that become insolvent had simply been allowed to be insolvent, it just means that other banks and investment firms would have bought their assets, the good assets, not the bad. The bad assets would have been liquidated. The other firms would have picked up the good assets, and everything would have continued. And it would have continued in a more healthy state. So the whole idea that there are firms that are too big to fail just isn't true.
Isn't it true that it would be better for the economy and the country as a whole to go ahead and go through that contraction without the government trying to save all of these too-big-to-fail companies. Let the economy just take its natural course and recorrect itself. Wouldn't that be better?
Yeah, absolutely. The free market or free price system, it works through incentives. You know, you can earn a profit if you do a good job and if you serve the consumer, but it also has its sticks. And those sticks or punishments are very important in order to make people behave properly and not to over-speculate, not to take undue risks. And if you just take away the threat of bankruptcy, as they have with the too-big-to-fail firms, it completely backfires. It just creates instability rather than stability. If you do get into trouble, if you borrowed too much, and there's too much bad debt, so you have one of these crises, what you have to do is recognize reality that this has happened, liquidate the bad debt, and then build a basis for going on into the future. And if you intervene, all you do is just create zombie banks and zombie institutions that are not alive but aren't fully dead or alive. We saw this in Japan. The Japanese had their bust, long before we did. And so they're kind of a test case. We watched them use these same Keynesian policies. It's just gone from bad to worse to worse. It's a good morality tale for us, and it certainly does not have a good outcome.
No, and we can watch it in real time right now. Section 22, you have titled A New Monetary System. And one of the sentences in this goes as follows. So long as government controls money, it will also want to control banks, and it will use control over both money and banking to finance itself in ways that distort free prices and lead to bubbles and busts. What new type of monetary system are you talking about here?
Well, all the government has to do, actually, is just get itself out of the money business. Because if it just turns over to private markets, the creation of money, private markets will create money. It's just like any other product. And throughout history, there's been lots of instances of private money. And if it's sound, it'll either be sound money or it won't be sound money, and people will figure out what's sound and what isn't. Historically, sound money has been backed by gold. So, a piece of paper that says it's worth $1 should be backed by a dollar's worth of gold. That's the way it's worked. But you don't have to specify what the system is. You just turn it over to the market, and the market will supply the money that the system needs to function, just like any other product.
Is that what we're seeing with the phenomenon of the Bitcoin?
Not exactly, because you see, the Bitcoin is not backed by a hard asset like gold. So it's a very interesting experiment. It's worth watching. It's worth learning from. But I certainly wouldn't, be using Bitcoins. If the government got out of the money business, would I use Bitcoin? No, I wouldn't use it. I would want something more secure than that.
Something that's backed by something that's tangible, like silver or
right.
Gold.
Right. Probably gold. Right.
Okay. You have another section, Section 23, oddly enough. The very next one is called Returning to America's Monetary Roots. And it says the government of Singapore allows checking accounts and debit cards denominated in gold and silver. Isn't that what you were just talking about here?
Yes. Yes, it is.
So
there's no reason why government has to have a monopoly on money. I would like to have government get completely out of the money business for the reasons that you just read, but at least as a first step, it would be sufficient if government would allow some competition in money. Because if there were alternative currencies that were backed by solid assets like gold or silver, then people would tend to use those, and they would stop using government money, and government would be forced to clean up its act. But because it has monopoly, there's no reason for it to clean up its act, and it just goes merrily on.
Isn't there one of the states, I think it's Arizona or Utah, that's allowing the use of gold coins now?
I'm not sure where that stands. I read that story, but I'm not sure where it stands.
I would imagine that the current federal government would probably sue the state if they tried to do something as common sense as that, I would think.
Well, the Constitution, forbids states from creating their own currency.
Right.
And the framers of the Constitution were wise to do that, but then they should have also forbidden the federal government from doing the same. And it's interesting that when the Federal Reserve Act was done in 1913, one of the main senators involved with it almost put in a provision outlawing paper money that was not backed by gold. But he then said, I don't think I need to do that because they'll never issue paper money without being backed by gold. I don't think I need to put that provision in. So he certainly was wrong.
A thought just struck me while we were discussing that, and I think it's relevant. When they were creating the current incarnation of the Fed, wasn't that what they came up with on that Jekyll Island meeting that they had? And wasn't at the same time John Astor, who was on the Titanic, he was against it? And I think one of the more outlandish conspiracy theories is that the Titanic was sunk on purpose just to get rid of John Astor.
I never heard that one.
I heard that one a couple of years ago,
and I doubt that John Astor would have had the power to stop it anyway.
He would have just argued against it. But that's where they came up with the Fed at that Jekyll Island meeting, wasn't it?
They did. That's right.
Okay.
That was a secret meeting. And again, Wall Street was running the show.
And they sort of have those meetings every year still, don't they?
Not at Jekyll Island, no.
No, not at Jekyll Island, but in other places. I forget exactly what they call the group. I don't think it's the Bilderbergs, but I don't remember. That doesn't really matter.
They're different ones.
Okay. In your book, The Free Price is Now, Ending the Fed, another section is called Who Should Run the Economy? And Llewellyn Rockwell suggested, and this is a quote from the book, that we, the people, should run the money system through our own consumer choices. Money is a product like any other, and a government monopoly of it just produces corruption, debased money, and irreparable injury to the free price system. Can you expand on that for just a couple minutes?
Right. So that's essentially what I've been arguing, that government does not need to be in the money business. And worst of all, if government has a monopoly of money. It's bad enough for government to be in the money business at all because they just abuse it. And by abuse it, I mean they just keep printing more and more money. That example I gave before where you had the 3 apples and $3, and they just create another $3, and they create another $3, and so the price of the apple becomes $2, and the price of the apple can become $3, and so on and so forth. Now, what's actually been happening lately, of course, is that although inflation has been rising, that is, consumer price inflation has been rising more than the government acknowledges or admits. Nevertheless, most of the money printed has not gone into consumer prices, it's gone into investment assets. So what is not just sitting in bank reserves and backing derivatives, as I mentioned, has tended to go into stocks during the dot-com bubble, and then housing during the housing bubble, and now again quite a bit of bubble-ish activity in stocks. But it moves around. So this sort of hot money that's been printed by the Fed, it moves around. It goes here, it goes there. It was a good bit of it was actually raising the price of gold, and then the speculators decided that game was over, so they moved out of gold, and they've been mostly in stocks lately.
Wasn't the first?
So who knows where it'll go next? Wasn't
the first one when we had that big speculation bubble in oil a few years ago? Remember that? When the gasoline went from what was it, something like $2 a gallon all the way up to $4.50, $4.75 in some cases, and we had that big bubble in the oil prices, and we know it was somebody speculating in there, but it was that part of that.
Well, in fact, that goes back to at least part of it goes back to 2007, when of course in 2006, Bernanke, the Fed chairman, had said everything was fine and the housing was not at risk and so on. In 2007, he realized that he was in trouble. So he reduced interest rates even further and printed even more money. And a lot of that money went right into energy, as you're saying. So the price of oil actually doubled at that moment, which, of course, was very hard on the economy. And he chose that very moment to also recommend changes in bank regulation and how they treated their assets. Something too technical for me to go into, but it's called mark-to-market. So the way they began to account for bank assets plus that sort of last gasp of borrowing that was fed by the Federal Reserve decision to lower interest rates in 2007, that actually precipitated the crash when it did in 2008. And if Bernanke had not done those things, I don't think we would have had the crash in 2008. I think it would have been in 2009 or perhaps 2010. It would have come, but it wouldn't have come at that moment. He really brought it on himself in an effort to prevent it.
Right. I have a theory that I have espoused and that some people agree with me on, and I want to run it by you and see if I'm actually right so I can tell people, ha, I was right. I noticed, starting probably in 2008 when this all started, that every time, and there seems to be a magic number, every time the price of gasoline gets over $4 a gallon, you find that it costs more to transport goods and food and for businesses to do deliveries and operate and everything. It seems that the economy contracts. In other words, you have a slowdown of business. And I'm in the printing business, so we rely on those business cycles a lot because we service other companies, obviously. I've seen whenever the price of gasoline gets up over $4 a gallon, all of a sudden we have a mini slowdown, if you will. And it seems to me that by keeping the gasoline prices so high, it is actually throttling the economy back. Am I right or wrong about that, do you think?
Well, I mean, that's one thing that keeps the economy back, but it's only one of so many things. I mean, in general, again, when you think of the gasoline market, again, the federal role is so big in that. The alternative energy market, the federal role is so big in that. So again, you don't have free prices, and you have all this crony capitalism that goes along with the lack of free prices. But this is true throughout the economy. I mean, why do drugs cost so much? Why do so many things cost so much? Why does one drug cost $500,000? One drug treatment, right? It's all because of government intervention, and which leads to those outlandish prices.
And everybody's got, not everybody, but anybody that has health care and takes prescriptions, you got a copay that's like $4. Some of the medications that I take, they only cost me a couple of dollars on my copay. But I know from my conversations with my pharmacist, who's a friend of mine, that some of these cost $200 for a refill, and I'm only paying $4. So that's exactly correct.
Some of them cost $10,000. Right now there's a bill in Congress called the compounding bill, which has been used by the drug industry and special interests to try to shut down the creation of drugs by compounding pharmacies, so that the big drug companies can have monopolies in those drugs. For example, there is a drug company that made a drug called Keynesian, and they got orphan drug approval by the FDA, so they had a monopoly on it. They were charging $17,000 a treatment, but the problem is that the compounding pharmacies can make the same thing for you for very little, so they want to get rid of the compounding pharmacies. They're trying to do it through this bill in Congress. It's another example of crony capitalism. So it just drives up all our costs. It's part of the reason why medical care is so expensive. The government gives a patent on a drug, and then it gives FDA approval of that drug. The drug company has to pay, on average, $1 billion for that approval, and then they have a monopoly, and then the costs are enormous. And meanwhile, the FDA won't allow natural products to compete with the drugs because they haven't been FDA approved, but they never can be FDA approved because not being patented, nobody can spend $1 billion to bring them through. So it's just a corrupt system that is driving up costs.
It just keeps getting better and better, folks. Another section in your book, and this is where the NSA might just go ahead and disconnect the entire show, is 27, is the Federal Reserve even operating legally? Tell us about that.
Well, there is a law which established the Federal Reserve. And, of course, it's very technical, and it's not something that you want to, curl up and read in bed before you go to bed, go to sleep. But it's there. There is a law. They're supposed to follow the law. And it seems quite clear if you read the law and know something about it, that in 2008, 2009, they violated the law. They didn't follow it. So I was curious as to what it would take to bring this to people's attention, and I looked into the possibility of a lawsuit, but again, it's so difficult to get standing. An individual cannot sue the government or sue the Fed for violating its own statute. Even a bank, it looks like, would have difficulty doing that, based on the fact that some banks sued over some other things recently, and the federal court said, sorry, you don't have standing. So it's very difficult to figure out who would have standing to complain about the Fed violating its own law. It's a scary situation, because if the government just ignores the law that it's supposed to be operating under, that is the same government which is supposed to enforce the laws and make all of us behave, and it's really chaos to have the government ignoring its own laws.
Yes, that's actually quite relevant to a lot of the things that I talk about on the show on a regular basis. That is very interesting. Gosh, I want to play a clip here, but it takes 45 seconds. I'll paraphrase the clip. It is actually a quote from a fellow by the name of William Binney, who is a former NSA operative, and he's what they call a whistleblower. And this goes to what you were just saying about the federal government not following its own laws. The interviewer asks him, what about people that say, well, I'm not breaking any laws, so why should I care? And his point is that you don't get to decide whether or not you're breaking the law. The central government decides that. So you could be sitting there doing absolutely nothing, and if the federal government decides that you are breaking the law, then they can come and arrest you anytime they want. Yet at the same time, if they're breaking the law, there's nobody to enforce that. And in that chapter that we were just talking about, is the Fed even operating illegally, you have the following. Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution states that Congress must authorize government spending, but the Fed budget is not approved by Congress. As previously noted, the agency simply prints new money to pay its expenses in a process that is kept completely secret. Now, isn't that where the problem lies right there?
Well, that's one example. Unfortunately, there are other examples as well. So, for example, the kind of securities that they bought with their newly printed money during the crash were not allowed by their underlying statute. The other problem, building what you just said, is that so many of the newer laws, unlike the Fed statute, which is an older law, so many of the newer laws passed in the last few years are so vague. The laws are very long, like Obamacare, or like the Wall Street Reform Act, and so on. And they're long, they're vague, they're hard to understand. They can be interpreted a lot of different ways, and then they're full of exemptions and waivers. So maybe you're subject to law, maybe you're not. If you go to the regulatory agency, maybe they'll let you off of it. So people are not being treated the same, and it's hard to say what it means. And so therefore, if the government wants to prosecute you, well, you're a sitting duck, because who knows what it means.
Exactly. This is the same thing we're seeing with the IRS playing extra scrutiny to conservative groups, while they let groups that are supporters of the current administration basically go without any scrutiny. Isn't that the same thing?
Yeah. Yes, and another example of that, which isn't widely known, is that they've got some new rule. I'm not sure if this is final yet or not, that they're proposing that if you owe any money to the IRS, they can yank your passport, that you wouldn't be able to travel or leave the country. Well, who's to say whether you owe money to the IRS? As we all know, the tax code is so bizarre and so long and impenetrable that they could easily say you owe money regardless. So then they can yank your passport.
I think they actually did pass that law if I'm not mistaken. I seem to recall that they did.
It's pretty scary.
Yes, it is. The time that we have left, we've only got about 5 minutes left. In this chapter, is the Fed even operating illegally? There is one glaring thing that I would like you to finish up the show on, and that is something that really got me upset when they did this, but nothing I can do about it. It is the part of the Dodd-Frank Act, which was passed in 2010, and it created a new executive branch department called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and that is inside the Fed. What is going on with that, and isn't that basically illegal right from the start?
Yes, it is, because, again, the Constitution makes it clear that if they're going to create agencies, they need to be funded by money authorized and passed by the Congress. So by putting it in the Fed, you bypass all that. The Fed will just print its money and pay for that agency. So whereas, we already had a situation where the Fed itself paid for itself with its own printed money, now it's going to also pay for this agency. And this agency is already bigger in size of staff than the rest of the Fed combined. So where is this going to stop? Are they going to just put more and more of the government inside the Fed to be financed with printed money, none of which will be subject to financial authorization by Congress, none of which will be subject to audit by Congress? It's blatantly unconstitutional.
It's just plain. It just strikes me as so corrupt. It's unbelievable. Is this part of the crony capitalism issue?
Absolutely, because of course this agency is charged with, it's yet another
90
regulator
seconds.
of the financial system of the banks and Wall Street and everything. So of course the whole idea among banks and financial groups and so on will be to get in there and influence these people. You'll find people who are working in this agency inside the Fed, and then they go to work for banks and Wall Street at large salaries, and then they go back into the agency. You'll find that starting. You'll find all sorts of attempts to influence and to make money, to make fortunes off the
60
rules that are
seconds.
promulgated by this agency. And the rules of Dodd-Frank are huge. I mean, the regulations are, the bill itself was just endless. The regulations are endless. They're only part of the way through creating them. It's going to be years and years and years. And every year that it takes to write more regulations is another year in which the campaign contributions will flow into Washington to try to influence the process.
That is, sadly, that is the final crazy point that we're going to make tonight. This is the end of our 2-hour interview. I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank you, Hunter, for putting up with my inane comments and
10 seconds.
poorly phrased questions. Hopefully, I made it.
It's been a total pleasure, and nothing was inane or poorly phrased.
Okay, I really appreciate that, and I want to thank our audience too, because they did not pester us with a lot of questions in the chat or phone calls or anything, so we were able to go right through everything and discuss everything that I had planned on, and I will have this up on, it'll be up on Blog Talk, it'll be up on YouTube, and it will be up on USSA Michigan probably tomorrow. I will send your assistant the link to all of the where she can find all of the interviews and everything, so that you can go ahead and use that to help promote your book. How does that sound?
Excellent.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and have a good evening, and I hope the book sells extremely well.
Thank you again, and you have a good evening as well.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.